Okay, welcome to challenge number 1 of data storage. For these challenges, I'm going to ask you a question, and the question is going to be written in a very similar fashion to the questions that you're going to experience on the exam. And when the question comes up on the screen, I want you to pause the video and budget yourself 2 minutes to come up with an answer. Why 2 minutes? Because 2 minutes is the amount of time that you should budget for every question in order to get done in the time allotted for the test. After the 2 minutes, and when you think you have your answer, I'm going to walk through the correct answers and the incorrect answers and tell you why and why not they are the way they are. So without further ado, let's get started with challenge question number 1. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully you've come up with an answer and you've done that within 2 minutes. Let's take a closer look at the question. Now, one of the things I like to do is read what the question is asking me first, and then go back and read the question in its entirety from start to finish. And that just helps me focus in on what's important and what's not important, because a lot of times AWS will include additional detail that really doesn't have any bearing on what the question is really asking. So if I go back and reread this question, I can pull out certain things. We're going to be dealing with large files. It must be accessible to the public. It should be scalable and low cost. Now, there may be better solutions out there, but these are the 4 we have to work with. So that's really important, because a lot of times you'll be asked a question and maybe your own experience says, oh, this is a much better way of doing it, but that's not an option to pick. And also there's no other constraints. So don't invent external constraints based on your own background that aren't specifically in the question. That'll end up causing you to overthink and maybe choose the wrong answer. So if we look at the answers here, so let's walk through the answers, starting with maybe A. We can create an EC2 instance with an EBS volume and configure it as an FTP. And then we can use a small application to provide to the customers, and they can use FTP to download. Okay, well, in that case, we're going to be incurring the cost of running the EC2 instance and then any sort of outbound traffic for that download. Now B is we can upload the files to an S3 bucket and grant it public read-only access. And then we can configure the requester pays for the S3 bucket and just distribute that URL. Well, the problem with this one is that we wanted public access. And if we try to use requester pays, well, that means that the public would have to have AWS accounts. And so this is a pretty bad idea. So I'm gonna guess that this is a pretty low on the list here. So let's keep going. Option C is we can upload the file to an S3 bucket and use infrequent access storage. And then we can configure that bucket as a static web server. Now, this option would work. The problem is that configuring it for infrequent access means that we're going to have to pay some extra money every time we access it. So storing it is going to be cheaper, but accessing it is going to be more expensive than if it were on just standard S3 storage class. So that's not a really good idea. I think it's probably a little bit better than the requester pays, which probably wouldn't work. Let's keep going and see what the last option is. Well, we can upload this game file to S3 and grant it public read-only access. We can build a small application containing a BitTorrent client, and then customers can download and run it. So that's actually a pretty good idea. And the reason for that is because we're going to put the file out on S3, and we're going to use S3's BitTorrent protocol support. So while the game gets initially downloaded by a few people, there's a certain point where there's enough critical mass that the peer-to-peer network is going to take over distribution. It's going to limit our data transfer costs for that file coming off of S3 out of the AWS network to the general public, because the public can use the other peers in the network. So I'm going to say my first option, my best option is D, followed by A, then C, then B.